What would you do to survive, to not be frozen in the bitter grip of winter? Have you ever heard about Jack, the man who slept inside a dead animal? It was back in the early 1900s when his story began, one of desperation, survival, and something far stranger. Jack was a seasoned outdoorsman, the kind who prided himself on his knowledge of the wilderness. He thought he was prepared for anything the forest could throw at him. But on that cold January day, a sudden storm swept in, trapping him miles from any civilization. The snow fell in blinding waves, and soon Jack found himself lost. The world around him, nothing but an endless expanse of white. The cold seeped through his clothes, chilling him to the bone. His fingers were numb, his feet heavy, and each breath he took felt like ice in his lungs. Jack knew he had to find shelter, and fast, or the forest would become his final resting place. He stumbled on, his eyes scanning the landscape, hoping for some miracle. And then he saw it, a massive stag, collapsed in the snow, its lifeless body half buried beneath the drifts. Jack hesitated, staring at the animal, its dark eyes frozen in place, its fur still glistening with a faint warmth. He knew what he had to do, and the thought made his stomach turn. But survival has a way of stripping away our hesitations. He used his knife to cut into the stag, carving out just enough space to crawl inside, using the animal's body as a shield against the cold. Jack lay there, surrounded by the warmth of the stag's remains, and slowly, the shivering subsided. The wind howled outside, but inside his strange shelter, there was a grim kind of peace. He closed his eyes, hoping for rest, hoping that he'd see the morning light. But as the minutes dragged on, a strange feeling crept over Jack. It was too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed down on him, that made him feel like he wasn't truly alone. He opened his eyes, staring out at the dark forest, and that's when he heard it, a faint, rhythmic thudding, like a heartbeat. Jack held his breath, straining to listen. It was impossible, just his own pulse echoing through his ears, he told himself. Yet the sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't coming from him. It was deeper, almost like it was resonating from the ground, or perhaps from the very body that encased him. Jack's breath hitched, his chest tightening as a chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran down his spine. And then he heard the whisper, a soft, indistinct murmur, drifting through the quiet. Jack's heart began to race, his instincts screaming at him that something was wrong. He tried to move, to push himself out of the cavity, but his body felt heavy, pinned. The whisper grew louder, words he couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable, angry, warning, as if he had intruded where he wasn't welcome. Jack struggled, his movements frantic, but it felt as though invisible hands were holding him down, pressing him deeper into the stag's remains. His vision blurred, the air around him thick, and in that moment of sheer terror, Jack understood. This was no ordinary carcass. The presence, whatever it was there with him, and it was not pleased. The search party found the stag 2 days later. The clearing was eerily quiet, untouched by predators, the animal's body still intact. There was no sign of Jack, not even a footprint. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. But finally, the search party found Jack huddled in the dense forest. He was a ghost of the man they once knew. He was covered in the dried blood of the stag, his eyes wide and unfocused, his hands trembling as he rocked back and forth. His friends called out to him, but his response was fragmented, disconnected. "They're coming," Jack mumbled, his voice hoarse and broken, barely louder than a whisper. "Save me. Help me. They are coming." His gaze flitted from tree to tree, as though seeing things none of them could see. He spoke in disjointed sentences, describing how he had survived the storm by crawling inside the stag, finding warmth in its body, but he went on to say more, about the spirits. "They were there," he said, his voice trembling. "Figures in the dark, whispering. They said I didn't belong. They wanted to take me. I saw them. They were reaching for me." The rescuers brought Jack back to town, but he was never the same. His eyes, once sharp and full of life, seemed haunted. He was plagued by nightmares, waking in the middle of the night screaming about shadowy figures, about whispers that never ceased. Friends tried to help, but Jack withdrew further and further, isolating himself, fearful of the night, terrified of the cold. His fear of the spirits never left him. He spoke often of feeling watched, of hearing voices when there was no one around. He insisted the spirits were still there, still wanting to take him, and as the years passed, Jack's behavior became more erratic. He covered his windows, blocked the doors with heavy furniture, and lit fires constantly to keep the cold away. 3 years to the day after the storm that had left him stranded, Jack was found dead in his bed. The neighbors had grown worried after not seeing him for days, and when they finally broke down his door, they found him there, lying motionless, his face pale, his eyes wide open, frozen in an expression of terror. His body was icy cold, his skin blue with frostbite. But the strangest thing was the room itself. The fire in the hearth was still burning, the air warm and stifling, and yet Jack was frozen solid, as though he had been left out in the depths of winter. The blankets that covered him were stiff with ice, a thin layer of frost covering the bed and floor around him. The townspeople were baffled, the doctors unable to explain what had happened. They spoke of heart failure, of the toll his fear and paranoia had taken on him, but no one could account for the freezing cold that clung only to Jack while the rest of the room remained warm. Rumors spread, whispers of spirits and curses, of something beyond understanding that had finally come to claim him. Jack's death became a mystery, an eerie legend that people spoke of in hushed voices. Some said it was the spirits, the ones he had spoken of, who had never stopped following him, who had waited for the right moment to take him. Others believed Jack's mind had simply given way, that he had convinced himself of the impossible until it had become real. But those who had seen his body, who had felt the icy chill in that warm room, knew that whatever had happened to Jack, it was far from natural. In the years that followed, people avoided the forest where Jack had been lost, steering clear of the place where he had first encountered the spirits that haunted him. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled through the trees and the temperature dropped, they would sometimes hear it, a faint whisper carried on the wind, a warning to anyone who dared to listen. They are coming. They are coming. They are coming.
Thanks for watching. Come back for more if you dare.